I'm Cornell Clayton. I'm the director of the Foley Institute, and on behalf of the Institute, I want to welcome you out to our event. Before I introduce our guests, I want to remind you we have another event at 4:30 this afternoon. We'll be talking about the impeachment hearings. We have Dave Adler from the Altruist Institute, which is an institute that is dedicated to teaching about the Constitution and American democracy. And Stuart Chin, who's a law professor at the University of Oregon. It's actually a really fascinating discussion. I trust all of you are paying attention to those hearings, given the fact it's only the fourth time in history we've had these types of proceedings. So that's at 4:30 here. Let me also thank Kenton Bird from the University of Idaho. I don't know where he went. There he is. who helped us organize today's event. And it's really a pleasure for me to welcome back to campus Brian Baird and Bob Inglis. We had them here last year to talk about climate change. One disclaimer, we came up with a title this year, Climate Change, Will Politics Kill Us? That was our title, not their title. Their title, I think, would have been more hopeful than our title, but we wanted to make it a little more controversial. So I'm going to introduce both our speakers. They're both going to take about 10 minutes, and then we'll have time for discussion after that. Our first speaker is going to be Brian Baird. Brian served 6 terms as a Democratic member of the United States House of Representatives. He holds a doctorate in clinical psychology, practiced clinically for 20 years, has written 3 books, served as a university president, and was an advisor to the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. In Congress, Brian chaired the Science and Technology and the Research, Technology, and Education subcommittees on energy and the environment. He currently advises leading law firms, business leaders, patient advocacy groups, and political campaigns on communication strategies, public policy, and ethics. And Brian's to my far right. And following him, we'll have Bob Inglis. Bob was first elected to the U.S. Congress in 1992, having never run for office before. He represented Greenville, Spartanburg, South Carolina until 1998. In 2004, he ran again and was reelected to Congress and served until losing his seat in a Republican primary challenge in 2010, largely due to his views about climate change. In 2011, Bob went full-time into promoting free enterprise action around climate change and launched the Energy and Enterprise Initiative at George Mason University, which eventually became republican.org, which he now serves as executive director for. Bob has been a resident fellow at Harvard's Institute of Politics, a visiting fellow at Duke University's School of the Environment, and a resident fellow at the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics. Join me now in welcoming both Brian Baird and Bob.
Well, I'll go ahead and start mostly because I'm the local in a way. So I represent all of Southwest Washington, so from Olympia down to the Columbia River, from the Cascades all the way west to the coast, the 3rd Congressional District. A kind of a classic political swing district, was held by a very conservative Republican before I picked it up in 1998, and then I held it for 12 years and retired in 2010. It's now held by a conservative Republican again. So it was a swing district, a lot of rural areas. You know that, some of you know the area. Columbia, a lot of forestry, a lot of crab fishing, and others out of the coast. And Bob and I are truly dear friends. You hear that in politics. It's like, in my dear friend, which means, ooh, I just stuck a knife in the back. But Bob and I truly are. Bob's son worked in my office. He and I traveled extensively together, including to several war zones. When he was in the majority, he was the chairman of our subcommittee and the science committee, and I was the ranking member, meaning the more senior member on that subcommittee on the minority side. And then he always treated me and my colleagues with the utmost of courtesy and dignity and respect. Oftentimes we didn't win the votes. I don't know why that happened. There were fewer of us. And then conversely, when I was chair, Bob and I he felt I treated him well. So we are really good friends, and we do this a lot, partly to show folks that we can work together, but also because this is the life or death question to sort of parrot the title of our planet. The planet will still be here. There's going to be a big rock with a lot of water on it, hopefully orbiting the sun for a long time. But whether the species that we love and hold dear and the quality of life is a whole other matter. So our goal really is to try to show that people can and must work together to solve this. especially for younger people, to try to inspire them, show that we're not all yahoos in Congress, and that it's always not always you're tearing at each other's throats. And to answer any questions you all might have, I wrote in Congress the Ocean Acidification Research and Monitoring Act, which is the federal bill guiding all major federal agencies on ocean acidification. For those who don't know, we all hear about climate change, which the CO2 goes in the air, traps reflected sunlight, increases the temperature, but a great portion of that CO2 that we put in the air actually gets dissolved in the water. And if I were to take CO2 right now, this is not fizzy water, and put CO2 in here, the pH would go down, which means the acidity goes up. And it goes up sufficiently to actually prevent shelled organisms, including the tiny pteropods and other zooplankton, but also, especially on the coast, crabs, clams, and oysters especially. So it prevents them from making their shells adequately, and the mortality in some of our coastal oyster growers was 90% in times of high acidic intake in the water. So it's serious business, and Bob and I work together on those kinds of things. The last thing I'll say is it's kind of illustrative of what we can do in this country if we do it right and work together. We've got a socially progressive, somewhat agnostic Taoist Northwestern guy from Northwest Timber Country, that's me, but a centrist Democrat, really. I was always a centrist Democrat by nature and by my district as well. And we've got a conservative evangelical Republican, and we're dear friends, and we work together on the big crisis of our time. So we'll talk more about how that plays out, etc. That's a little background.
Yeah, so thank you for having us here. It's wonderful to be in the Northwest. I think I'm going to end up losing a couple of my kids to the Northwest. They seem to be really attracted. I'm not sure we're going to get them back to South Carolina or to the East Coast. Something about mountains and skiing and all kinds of fun things. And I'm in answer to the question about will politics kill us, I'm here to say with Brian that perhaps figuring out climate change might be the thing that models the behavior by which we save the Republic. And that's my ultimate hope when we're dealing with climate change, is it's not only going to perhaps solve the problem of climate change, but it may also help heal the Republic, because we may just come to realize that we're literally in this together. So it's like we're doing an experiment on our common home, as the book calls it. And we're sitting in the petri dish, and we're picking up handfuls of medium, and we're having a big food fight right in the petri dish. But at some point, we're going to realize that we are literally sitting in the petri dish together. We're doing the experiment on ourselves. And so it may be the case that we figure out a way out of this. Now, it's a strange way that we go about doing that at republicen.org, isn't it? Because I'll hand out some cards later so you can join us if you'd like. But it's a little bit off-putting, isn't it? The marketing, it's republicen.org. Okay, so every progressive, you want to sign up at something called republicen.org? Of course, what we're after is any conservatives in the room who want to join up with republicen.org, because we think that if that's your case, a conservative who cares about climate change, you're actually the most important people on the planet, because basically the left is going about as far as it's going to go on climate. The increment must come from conservatives in America in order to solve this. And so the question is how to get them. And so the way that we go about doing it is speaking their language. It's my natural language of conservatism, and it's a very different language than the language of the left on climate. So our language is one of basically energy abundance and prosperity, not of doing with less, not of criticizing the capitalistic system or evil corporations, but rather innovation and more energy, more mobility, more freedom through the power of the free enterprise system. So our specific solution, I'll tell you, is a revenue neutral, border adjustable carbon tax. Pay no attention,
what
ladies
was
and
that? Carbon what?
Pay no attention, ladies and gentlemen, those last two words. Let's focus on the first two compound adjectives there. It's revenue neutral and it's border adjustable. So revenue neutral, which is it's a carbon tax, but it's revenue neutral, which means we're going to cut your taxes somewhere else, or we're going to dividend all the money back. So there's no growth of government. And it's border adjustable. That means that we're going to apply the tax on entry of goods from other countries through our ports that don't have the same carbon tax in their country of origin. And so we would expect China to object to that based on precedent or their previous patterns, and they would say it's an impermissible tariff. We think they lose that case based on precedents in the chemical industry. Say you can have a content tax. This would be a content tax, it'd be a CO2 content tax. And so if it's upheld, we think it would be, then we figure that China, 24 hours later, because they do have an amazing way of reaching consensus, would have the same price on carbon dioxide, because they're paying on entry through the port of Seattle, let's say, a sheet of flat steel coming from them gets taxed. Tax money ends up in Washington. If we're right and they've lost in the WTO, they figure out pretty quickly that if we had taxed this internal in China, then that sheet of flat steel would come through the port of Seattle with no adjustment. And the tax money would be in Beijing, not in Washington. So 24 hours later, they got the same carbon tax. And then the whole world is following. And now what you've got is an internalization of the negative externalities associated with burning of fossil fuels. That's quite a $10 series of words, isn't it? I once said that to the Greenville News, the largest newspaper in the district that I represented. And the reporter stopped me. He said, "What did you say?" And I said, "We need to internalize the negative externalities." Can't write that in this paper, man. We write it at 7th grade level. And so I said, "Reveal the hidden cost." Next day it said in the paper, Inglis said we need to reveal the hidden cost of burning of fossil fuels. And that's what it is, right? So our whole argument is Econ 101. If you've taken that, it's an argument that you internalize, you attach to products the cost they impose on society, and then you have an accountable, transparent marketplace judge that product, and the result will be innovation faster than government mandates or regulations or fickle tax incentives could ever imagine, because all of us, 7 billion people around the world then, would be seeing the true cost of energy and demanding the better, cheaper, cleaner fuels of the future. So that's our story at republican.org. We think it is bedrock conservatism to talk about solving climate change using free enterprise. And if you're a progressive and this sounds sort of familiar, maybe because it's the same thing that Al Gore has been saying for about 30 years, literally. A revenue neutral, border adjustable carbon tax. It's also what almost every economist in the world says. And I know in this political moment we're prone to overstatement, and that may sound like an overstatement, but it is actually correct. It's hard to find an economist who wouldn't say that that's the solution. The first thing to do about climate change is to tax carbon dioxide. And so back to my hope that we could actually bring America together. And one of the things that encourages me along the way, get a little bit discouraged sometimes in this business. And one of the places I go to remember for encouragement is that I know that Art Laffer, one of Ronald Reagan's economics advisors, is a neighbor of Al Gore's in Nashville, Tennessee. Art was tired of being in California. He went looking for a state that was eligible to receive the Laffer residents. Anybody know what those states? There are 8 states that he looked at.
Washington, Nevada, Tennessee, Florida, Texas, South Dakota, and what did I leave out?
And what's the common denominator?
They have no income tax and the sales tax. The parenthetical on this is, until the most recent tax cut or tax change, I'm the guy who wrote the bill that allowed Washingtonians to adopt their sales tax. from their federal returns, and not only money, but our seven. That's why I knew all the 7 states.
Wow, isn't that interesting?
So really rich people like to move to our states because they don't have to pay income tax, right?
Yes. So Art moved to Tennessee, and so they're neighbors, and they're literally, Art has been over to Al's house, and I've heard this from both of them. That Al went over to Art's house, and they talked it through, and they came to the conclusion that what I've just described, a revenue neutral, border adjustable carbon tax, works for both of them for very different reasons. Art, because he desperately, Al, because he desperately wants to reduce emissions, right? Al Gore. Art, even though he's agnostic about climate change, and you'll go to our website, you'll see a video of him saying he's agnostic about climate change. He says he doesn't need to know. All you need to know is you're taxing income. He says tax anything else. Emissions will do fine. Switch the tax to emissions. And so we think if you can bring Art and Al together, we can bring America together and lead the world to a solution on climate change. And that's, oh, and I should add, that's what I've been doing ever since being tossed out of Congress. I was 6 years saying climate change was nonsense. I didn't know anything about it except that Al Gore was for it. Okay, so I admit it's pretty ignorant, but that's the way it was for my first 6 years. But I represented a pretty conservative district in South Carolina. Actually, let's see, I'm across the river. I can say it now. The reddest district in the reddest state of the nation. When I'm on the other side of the river, I've been sort of pulling that punch a little bit. I've been saying one of the reddest districts in one of the reddest states in the nation. So that fit the district, and then I was out 6 years doing commercial real estate law. Had the opportunity to run again in 2004. My son came to me, he was voting for the first time, he just turned 18. This is the kid that ended up working for Brian Baird later. And he said to me, Dad, I'll vote for you, but you're going to clean up your act on the environment. So that, plus a trip to Antarctica, plus a second trip to Antarctica with a stopover in Great Barrier Reef, led by Brian, and interacting with an Australian climate scientist who inspired me by his faith and his desire to love God and love people by addressing climate change, caused me to come home and introduce a bill that I just described to you, the revenue neutral border adjustable carbon tax. And that and some other heresies against Republican orthodoxy at the time got me tossed out in a Republican primary in June of 2010. So ever since then, been out trying to convince conservatives to enter the competition of ideas. And so we speak mostly to conservatives. And the language I'll be using is a lot of conservative language, but that's by design. It's my natural language, but it's also our intended audience, because we're out to get those conservatives, to convince them to raise their hands in class. You got the answer, raise your hand. And then hope to find, and this is where Brian embodies this, is hope to find progressives saying, sure, we can do that. Let's do it together, and then let's answer the question that no, we're not going to let politics kill us. We're going to actually use the political system to solve this challenge. We believe so. Give me an amen. I'll stop preaching. We'll pass the plate. Do you believe that? I hope you do. I hope you do. We'll find out in your questions.
Okay. So we have about a half an hour, maybe also for some Q&A, maybe I'll start us off. So I was right, that you're much more hopeful. Your title would have been, can we heal our politics?
Yeah.
But here's the problem, right? So we know that the carbon neutral, or a revenue neutral carbon tax is the preferred policy position of almost everybody who looks at this. Whenever it's on the ballot, it loses. Even in a blue state like Washington. Mm-hmm. How do you get past that?
Yeah, well, it's true. You've tried twice here, right? And it failed twice. We're at Republican.org, we're always excited when a state tries it, but we're aware that it's got an Achilles heel that is just a killer argument against a state carbon tax. And that is, you got it right, it's a revenue neutral carbon tax, but it's not border adjustable. And if I were still in Congress and you gave me that, I wouldn't vote for it, because I represent a wonderful manufacturing district. And if you can't get if you can't do the border adjustment, it's not worth doing. So it's a killer argument against it. I mean, now that it's not on the ballot, I'll just go ahead and say it. When it's on the ballot, we try to, be nice and, your ombudsman is a friend, and he did the first one, and I try to be. But it's a problem. Only the federal government can do a border adjustment under the U.S. Constitution. State can't. So you expose your energy-intensive industries to the desire to pick up and move out of Washington State or move out of whatever state that internalizes that negative externality. And so, commendable for that state, but on the other hand, if you're manufacturing in that state, you might pick up and leave. And of course, when I say it's not worth doing, I really mean that to be the case, even if you had a federal law that was revenue neutral carbon tax. Let me defend my assertion that I wouldn't vote for it, because if you vote for that, you're voting for a domestic only internalization of that negative externality, which means that if you're an energy intensive industry in the United States, you pick up and you move to a place where they don't internalize that negative externality. So you pick up and you move to China. Well, once you get there, you emit more than you're emitting here, because we're way more energy efficient than they are. So you end up losing employment and losing the race, and we believe it is a big race to reduce emissions. So it's just go ahead, don't hold back, Bob. Tell us what you really think about state initiatives. I mean, I wish everybody well that tries them, because it gets the conversation going, but it's got to be at the federal level, and it's got to be border adjustable.
What's border adjustable mean? What does the phrase border adjustable mean?
It means that at the border you impose the tax if a good is coming from a country that doesn't have the same pricing mechanism for carbon dioxide. It doesn't have to be a carbon tax, by the way, in that other country. It could be a cap and trade system that accomplishes an equivalent objective of forcing that the socializing of the soot, basically, and the socializing of the carbon cost onto the price of that product. And so that's sort of a border adjustment.
But that includes the manufactured products as well. It's not just the direct petroleum products. So that it's fairly easy for us as a country to tax any incoming oil or coal or whatever else. You just say we're bringing this much ton, we're going to put that in. But how do you deal with a ton of steel that was heavily carbon intensive to produce? And if we're taxing our domestic steel producers with the carbon tax because of what they use to produce their steel, what happens if China is not doing it or some other country? Then it's a significant reverse tariff on ourselves. So you've got to be able to think, okay, you guys have to internalize your externalities too. And we try, the second carbon tax here did try to carve out a lot. They got a lot of criticism, as you know, but Boeing and a lot of other people got sort of exemptions or reductions in the tax, and that was designed to try to address that issue. But you're right, points well taken.
You have a solution, but you have a problem. Because there are a lot of people in this country that are not convinced that climate change is happening. And a lot of those are living in places like South Carolina, but a lot of them are living in places like rural Washington. And they do not believe that we can change the ecology or the atmosphere of this planet to the extent that scientists are describing.
Right.
This is a bedrock belief.
Right.
And it can come from religion, it can come from just innate conservatism, it can come from innate cussedness. But I've been out in the trenches, and farmers who recognize that the value of their land depends a lot on how much rain that land gets are essentially immune to any discussion of climate.
Right.
Other than weather. They'll talk about weather, but they won't talk about climate.
This is where we need Dr. Brian Baird, psychologist, because having to temporarily sound like a psychologist, he actually is one. You got the right thing. You said solution and problem, and it's solution aversion, we think, that drives a lot of what you're describing. You know, the concept of if I don't think I've got a solution that fits with my values, I doubt the existence of the problem. Sounds irrational, does it? Until I tell you, here's a plan of surgery for that back problem you're having. First, we're going to take your head off. After we get your head off, we work on your spine, then we put your head back on. Thanks, Doc, I feel a lot better. I don't have a back problem because your solution is nuts. You're not going to take my head off. So consider what conservatives heard about climate. The UN, blue helmets on, are going to come here and get with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and they're going to draw up some regulations to regulate your very breath. Nothing in that paragraph attractive to conservatives. That's what they heard about climate. And so what we have to do is undo all that and basically say, you're a farmer, are you noticing some different rainfall patterns? Are you noticing that maybe crops that you used to be able to grow in, say, Eastern Washington or Idaho are going to move into Canada? Let's talk about that. If you're a hunter in Pennsylvania, are you noticing that there are ticks in the woods in January and February that didn't used to be there? And that you're susceptible to Lyme's disease in those ticks? You notice these things? And of course in Florida and South Carolina coast, North Carolina coast, are you noticing the clear day flooding in Charleston? Water's coming up. And so we start by describing, we're aware that they're becoming more aware, but if you don't think you've got a solution, isn't it what we all do? If we don't think we've got a solution to a problem, we generally delay in doing anything about it, right? I think that's true of health matters, right? If you think that there's nothing I can do about it, well then let's try to forget it.
I'd rather not know. People say it all the time.
Yeah, I'd rather not know, yeah.
And understandably so.
But I mean, you can speak to this better than I can, because I mean, there's a lot of psychology involved in this, right? I mean, how do you get people to engage with a problem that they think is too big for them, right? And give them efficacy, a sense of they can do something about it.
But part of why Bob being here and you being here, hearing from Bob, and part of why we're such good friends is he comes from so often now in our politics and our civic life, we're trying to see which team you're on. What's your secret jersey color, so I can know whether I like you or not, before I even know who you are as a person. And climate can be one of those jersey colors, right? You're pro-climate, you're anti-climate, you're a believer, you're a disbeliever. And when you hear Bob's portfolio, you'd say, what is it, 93% lifetime conservative voting average, evangelical Christian, represented a deep red district in a deep red state. You'd say, oh, I know what color jersey he's got. And then suddenly Bob says, no, I believe the Lord calls on me to save his great creation. And I believe conservatively we can solve this. That starts shaking people out a little bit. So that's important right there. The second thing is, I think the scientific and activist community has done a pretty bad job of messaging on this. And we've talked too much about messaging, but we were asked by these kids the other day at high school. So I've got Thanksgiving coming up, and I'm going to have some people around the table who don't think climate change is real. Now I think it's real, and if the topic comes up, what do I do? And I said, well, have some ice water there, and this may sound trite, but it's very real and serious. Take a piece of ice out and set it on a tray there, or on your tea saucer or whatever, and then say, look, let's not get into all the really deep science and the computer modeling and whether it's 2 degrees centigrade, 4 degrees centigrade, whatever. Let's just ask this question: what's the difference between 31.9 degrees and 32 degrees? A tenth of a degree Fahrenheit. It's the difference between whether that ice cube stays ice or becomes water. And here in Eastern Washington, that's the difference between whether we have snowpack in the mountains, and that's the difference between whether we have water to irrigate our crops. That's the difference with salmon having enough water to carry them up and downstream. It's the difference in how much hydropower we generate. That's the difference in our electrical bill. That's the difference in your ability to irrigate your crops. A tenth of a degree. So even if there's the tiniest impact, it's worth thinking about. And then the other thing that I always say to people is, one thing people don't appreciate, we have known for more than 100 years, we being the world via science, that if you put CO2 in a container and shine sunlight down into it, it's going to heat up more than a container with this equal volume of air but less percentage of CO2. We know that. We can do that in a lab bench. We also know that if I take this bottle of water and I dissolve CO2 into it, what happens to its acidity? We can measure that. 100 times out of 100 times. Literally 100% reliability, not abstract modeling. Put CO2 in this, it gets more acidic. Then if it's more acidic and I put calciferous organisms, calcium based, just like when you dye, it's not quite as strong as vinegar by a darn sight, but you put vinegar on an egg before you dye the Easter egg because that dissolves the shell. Or the seed organisms that depend on shells, if the water's more acidic, they can't grow their shells. And I can do that in a laboratory bench. And I can do it right in front of you, in my kitchen, in your kitchen. So then the question is, if we know that CO2 retains more heat, and other greenhouse gases, but we know that CO2 makes water more acidic, then the next question is, are we putting CO2 into the air? Well, surely we are, in massive quantities. Look at any freeway in the evening, look at any coal-fired power plant. We're putting huge amounts. And then the third question that follows, okay, if science would predict more acidic water, and science would predict increasing temperatures, are we really seeing it? Indeed we are. The hottest temperatures globally recorded in the last 15 years, something like the top 10 in history have been in the last 15 years. I can't remember that number right. And our best Washington-based, world-leading scientists tell us that right off our coast, the water is becoming more acidic, and it's resulting in a 90% mortality of oyster. Right? 90%. So science can tell us how it's doing it. We're doing the very experiment on a grand scale, and the results are as predicted. And so, and then the last but not least, and this is where Bob's so smart in his messaging, is we are Americans, not Americans. We can lead the world in the technology. This doesn't have to be something that devastates our lifestyle and our economy and everything and puts people out of work. If America puts its mind to it, we can lead the world in saving the world and growing our economy. And if we don't put our mind to it, then we fall behind other countries that are our economic competitors. So what's to lose? I mean, that's the kind of case I try to make for it, that in a respectful, calm, start with something everybody gets, that ice turns to snow, or water turns to snow, and that's kind of important to us here. You don't have to go, I'm a skier, so I care a lot about this, but even if I were to skier, just raise your snow level just a little bit. So anyway, that you're right about the problem. I think we've been going about it in kind of the wrong way, and we've been letting it be too tribal. It's like, are you with us or are you against us? And what Bob does by his personal, courageous example is say, you don't have to be an either or.
So, on your idea of our team jerseys, do you think who's presenting the solution matters? Because I worry that by talking about like a carbon tax and dividend and being perceived as liberal, I'm sort of making that subject toxic, making it a non-solution because I'm coming from the wrong team.
I think you run that. I think we all run that risk on the left. That's why, again, we've got to get conservatives that are saying, no, this is actually a conservative approach.
Yeah, and that's why I begged Henry Waxman several years ago to hold off on filing a carbon tax bill until we could message more. He held off for a little while because the messenger matters because we all learn from people who like us, and we especially learn from people who are like us, right? If you like me, you can tell me a lot, and especially if you are like me. But if you don't like me, and you make that clear to me, I'm not going to hear any more you've got to say, right? Because to heck with you, is basically what I'd be saying, right? Because you don't like me. And so that's why we got to go to that farmer and say, I like you. And by the way, I'm a farmer too. I got a farmette.
Farmette. I'll tell your story about the powerful experience you had. The top scientist was talking to me about the carbon record in Antarctica, and he had to go call his mom.
Oh yeah,
it's such a powerful story.
So my first trip to Antarctica, Donald Manahan, a biologist from USC, University of Southern California, was just a very impressive scientist, you know, and I was a little bit intimidated by the guy, right? Because, I mean, here he's a very, very fine scientist, and I was not so much, shall we say. And but yet on the science committee, so, you know, a little bit tenuous position, a little bit vulnerable, right? And and there were other people on the trip that were more knowledgeable than I was. But Donald Manahan is his master teacher, you know, and he'd go to John McCain's question, and he'd, because the senator was having a Senate trip while we were having a House trip, and he'd go to the postdoc level and answer there, and then he'd hear my question and he'd go down to the GED level, and he'd answer there without condescension. That was the key. I mean, without condescending, he'd go to the GED level. And then, and by the way, that's my view of what a real great teacher is somebody that can modulate that whole range. You know, people who don't quite know their stuff all that well just stick right in their own bandwidth, and the question comes from anywhere else, they can't really answer terribly well. But Donald Manahan would do the whole range. And so then he said to me, he said, I need to go call my mother, because he had an aging and ailing mother, and I had an aging and ailing mother at the time. And the fact that he wanted to go call his mother, which is a pretty difficult thing to do from Antarctica. You had to get the data phone, and you had to anyway. That meant something to me. And it's odd, but it made me more able to hear his science. And I know that sounds rather strange and really weird. I mean, why would the fact that he loves his mother make his science more credible? Well, because I'm a human being, and he's a human being, and he's really a neat son. He loved his mother, and he needed to go call her. And that meant something to me, right? And so that's we, republican.org, we think it's all about a heart blockage. Once we get through the heart and get to the head, all this will clear pretty quickly. Because we firmly believe that we can show conservatives, Milton Friedman, these are actual conservatives. We have a harder time with populist nationalists, I will tell you. But with an actual conservative, they know to bow, as I mentioned Dr. Friedman's name, right? One of the, the fathers of modern conservatism. And so we show a clip of him on the Phil Donahue show. What do you do about pollution then, Dr. Friedman, if you don't want to regulate it? Friedman says, you tax it. You tax pollution. And then he goes on to explain internalizing negative externalities. You can see the clip on our website, by the way, on the media tab, of that little clip of Dr. Friedman on the Phil Donahue show. I show it all the time at conservative audiences.
And the other thing about that, back to your original question, you've just got to emphasize, the problem is there's no trust that we mean what we say in government anymore. But Bob is so smart and emphasizes, look, it's got, from a conservative perspective, it's not a new tax, it's a revenue neutral fee / tax that you'll get back. And the way you get it back is either a direct dividend or it's an offset on your payroll tax, which is a regressive tax. So that ought to bring progressives in, to reduce the regressivity of a progressive. Because you all know your Social Security Medicare tax is regressive because it's the first dollar you earn, you're paying it, and the super rich who are making money off stocks, they're paying nothing in Social Security. So that's a regressive tax. So the point is, we're not just using this as a slush fund for big government. We're using this to offset it, but to put it as a fee on the cost. They may not all buy it, but you don't expect people to have this epiphany that moment and go, damn, I never used to believe in climate change or taxation, but now I do. That's probably going to take a little longer.
It does have, you have that progression you're saying. What is it?
Yeah, people go from pre-contemplation to contemplation to preparation to change. And so you're not always trying at the Thanksgiving dinner table to get somebody to say, well, you're right. I've been an idiot. Stupid me. Thank you. I'm so happy you went to college and you could come home and enlighten me at dinner table. That's not going to work. But if you just ask a little question with your piece of ice and say, what if it's just a 10th degree? But it happens over time. What happens to our glacier? And by the way, we know in the Northwest our glaciers are melting. We see it. I mean, you can look at pictures of Rainier and the Olympics and they're just gone. And we know what's happening to our water temperature. We know what that's doing to salmon. People know it. They don't like it. So now what you say is, there are ways to deal with that. We have solutions.
Well, I tend to be skeptical about discourse that's going to change, because no matter how much you change, there are still forces, and I really like to have you address that a little bit. It seems to me that there are very major forces that in fact make money off of ruining the planet. And that somehow the notion that you can control that without facing the fact that there's a huge, do the people who have all that money, are they going to be at risk of climate change? Not much, but I think they're going to make a whole lot of money, have a whole lot of property to buy. And I really like to have you perhaps address the forces that drive climate change. They've been around for a while, but I really have a difficulty imagining somehow they're going to go away.
Yeah. I think we can count that they are not going to go away, right? That there are vested interests that very much want to continue to burn fossil fuels. But I feel a little bit like, it's a little bit like my first congressional race. I challenged an incumbent, and the smart money said there's no way we were going to win. I mean, we had no money. We had the NRCC, National Republican Congressional Committee, came to help me, and which is sort of surprising that they decided to give us the maximum, which was like $63,000, right? And so it was going to be, there's a potential that there was going to be a seventh game of World Series. So a guy named, a friend of the met, who's back to sort of being a friend after, anyway, it's a long story. Jim, who subsequently became a U.S. Senator.
And had a heritage for a time.
Yeah, told me, he called me up and he said, Bob, if there's a seventh game, we might put all the money on one spot. We had one ad, and it was going to be one spot. So it turns out there wasn't a seventh game, so it sort of, so we had to maybe run 10 times or so. It was a miracle I got elected, I got to tell you. Right, we were up against a moneyed we had a money problem, we had a name recognition problem. But I knocked on like 5,000 doors, and the message started spreading, and lo and behold, it worked. And so I feel like I'm running another congressional race like that. It's just that we're running it in 3 different kinds of places. We're running it in the place you'd expect, Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina coast, where the water's coming up. We're running it in New York, upstate New York, in 3 districts, 1 district in Michigan that are moderate districts. Play a moderate there when I go. I'm not very good at it, but I play a moderate when I get there. And then head turner places. That's Utah, Texas, Idaho, and we put Eastern Washington in on that. And the reason I call them head turner is that if people in South Carolina knew that Mitt Romney, in his last round of town hall meetings, talked about climate change at every one of them, floating a trial balloon about a carbon tax, that would turn their heads. They'd say, what? Utah isn't at risk of going blah, blah, blah. Utah is at risk of having a problem with losing snow and losing winters and things like that. Once I went to meet with a very highly placed fellow in the Mormon church, and we're sitting down in this very impressive conference room, and he says to me, as I'm going down in the chair, he says, you don't need to tell me about climate change. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is bad. This is going to be a bad meeting. And he continued, my skis are hitting rocks.
Yeah. I'm a University of Utah graduate. I know what he's talking about.
and I knew we had him.
You got the other religion, brother.
Yeah, we had his heart at that point. I mean, he loved skiing. And so he had his heart. Now his head is working overtime to figure out how to solve this problem that his heart has. And so I realize what we're up against. We're up against people with a lot of money who have a vested interest. But there are some chinks in that armor over there. So I'm going to probably have some people roll their eyes. ExxonMobil, is for exactly what I just described. How many eye rolls did I get? Right? Because I've once said to their lobbyist, he used to give me their pack checks. I said to her, no progressive believes me when I say that. She says, Bob, we sell petroleum and natural gas. If you put a price on carbon dioxide, natural gas beats coal better than it's beating it now. That's why we're for a carbon tax. And I said, great, Jeannie. I can go tell people you're just trying to make money. What else would be believable? And so that's what they're doing. They're trying to make money. They're getting an enormous amount of natural gas, and they're going to sell it and beat coal. Coal is going to go out of business because of natural gas. And so in other words, there's some. So where you sit determines where you stand in politics and in business, right? And so there's some that will hold on to the very end. Murray Coal will hold on to the very end. But ExxonMobil is bailing out and saying, we're not in this disinformation campaign anymore, is what they tell us.
And this is not to say by any means that we don't need campaign finance reform and electoral reform and that whole process. We do. Partly because, the four sweetest words in the English language are not I love you, honey. It's we have the votes.
Don't say that around Rachel.
I know. Yeah, I get it. but so we've still got to win elections. But I think the other thing is, back to the sort of theme of this talk, the fisherman who likes to fish for salmon, and the religion of steelhead, which is pretty popular in this state, you start telling those folks that they're not going to be, and this is real, that 2 generations from now, they may not be able to take their kids fishing. And suddenly ExxonMobil's money and those attack ads, and when they see it themselves a little bit, when they see that the harvest is going down, they watch the orchid population decline. Now, they'll have other alternatives for solutions to salmon, which I support actually. Vegetarian lefty that I am, I wrote a bill to kill sea lions at the dams, which drove my environmental base nuts. And I am a vegetarian. My sister didn't like it much either. Charismatic megafauna, I'm going to kill him. But that is not enough of the solution, right? It's a comprehensive solution. The other thing is, one thing we do on the progressive side is the Republicans are a whole lot easier. They're like, if you're anti-abortion and you're pro-gun, that's it. They don't even really believe in free enterprise anymore because they
or balancing the budget.
Or balancing the budget. That's clear, and responsible foreign policy's out the window. But those 2 things, that's simple. We're like, okay, thanks. I know you believe in climate change, but how are you on 6, 7, 8 other different things? We've got to be kind of clean on the climate change deal. And we've got to give, as Bob says oftentimes, we've got to give space for grace for people who aren't like us on other issues to be like us on climate. You may set your gun debate at the door on climate. You may, because if you're a hunter, you may like your gun, but you also like having things to hunt. And so we've got to try to figure that. And when we do that, and we get religious leaders, and we get corporate leaders, and we get labor leaders, etc., then you start building coalitions that I think can become overwhelming to Koch brothers and Murray Coal.
You mentioned that ExxonMobil is for this tax on taxing coal. You're not taxing natural gas at all.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It gets taxed too.
Okay, so
it emits 50% less CO2 when burned compared to coal, and so that's why the reason that coal is in such trouble is not because of Barack Obama's war on coal.
Right.
It's because of fracking, and the expanded supply brought down price, and basically, for example, in South Carolina, 6 coal-fired plants converted to natural gas. No longer customers of Pennsylvania and Wyoming, they're customers of Texas now.
Same thing happened here. The Centralia coal plant turned into natural gas.
how much more natural gas do you have to burn to get the same amount of energy as coal?
It's less energy dense, so you do have to burn, but the reduction in CO2 is real. That's why we've had some success until last year of our emissions going down in America, but then they tipped up last year. But it was because of natural gas.
Okay.
But it should make clear for anybody who's worried that we're going to stay with natural gas forever. I don't think natural gas will remain in that prime position, because if we get breakthroughs in solar efficiency, or we get better batteries, which I just was hearing from a chemist this morning that every day there's an article or two in his chemical journal about people working on the batteries, is that will replace, natural gas will be gone too.
But that's also why I think Exxon's on this, and I don't know how public they are, but they think they can out-science the other guys. I mean, if you look at what it's gonna take to solve this, it's technology, it's science, and they've got huge capital reserves. And so, yeah, they've got big infrastructure development in coal and gas, oil and gas, but they've also got big infrastructure reserves and capital reserves in terms of their science, who knows a hell of a lot about where energy comes from and how the chemistry of it goes. They, I think, at some point are going to say we can make the play the other way.
Yeah, sort of like the railroads. It could have been airlines. They were in the people moving business. They had capital. People won't fly. They were wrong, but they could have been the airlines.
Yeah, I remember saying, who the heck needs a portable phone? Which is why I'm here.
You could have invested with that.
No, here's a great idea. This is an absolutely true story. I did, however, have the prescience to believe that the PC was going to be a big damn deal. And I had some minor inheritance from a grandfather who passed away, and I invested it in early PC companies. And then a stockbroker advised me to buy oil and gas futures. I did, and it went bankrupt. I lost every penny I had. That's what I got for listening to a stock. I'm not following my own heart.
Yeah.
So a lot of science nowadays also shows that even with a dramatic decrease in our carbon emissions, that it is to a certain extent still inevitable that we might see extreme consequences of climate change. Do you feel that we should see more policy turn towards those issues such as like refugee crisis along with the consequences of climate change?
Both, but it's been a really interesting evolution of some of the people who don't want to see action on climate change have gone through a really interesting evolution, and it's been, first of all, there is no evidence whatsoever that the globe is heating. That's a hoax. That's an academic hoax created by the lefties. And then gradually, like the Koch brothers funded a major independent scientist who came up and said, you know what? It's warming up. That didn't get a lot of press, but they paid for the guy, and he, to his credit, told him, no, it's actually getting warmer. So then it became, well, okay, maybe it's getting warmer, but things happen, climate change, it gets warmer and colder over time. And they said, no, as a matter of fact, the science is really clear that it's actually related most predictably to greenhouse gas emissions. So they gradually are coming up with this chain of excuses, right? And sort of the latest is, well, we don't know if we cause it or not, but we do need to deal with mitigation, because even if nature causes it, we got to fix it. So that's progress, sort of. So yes, we have to deal with the mitigation thing. The hard part is, to what extent does that mean? It's two things. One, the mitigation is going to be so expensive. I mean, you look at the real estate in Florida alone, and you look at where so many of our railroad tracks are, and you look at the hydroelectric and the power system. The implications are so vast of rising sea level, destruction of fisheries, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, we have to mitigate, but mitigate is going to be really much, much harder than prevention. So, and then the risk is people are they're going to have this attitude that tech can solve it all. And actually tech can solve it all, but not in the mitigation front. We need to have 10 times the Apollo mission commitment to renewable energy. And sadly, this is the first time I've said the name of he who shall not be named, but when he became president, they set to zero out the most progressive research on both climate change, but also on alternative energy, the ARPA-E program that came out of Bob and my committee. So we've got to just throw everything at every possible intervention. And then frankly, as individuals, we've got to take personal responsibility for behavior change. Everybody makes fun of Jimmy Carter because he said, turn your thermostat down. Yeah, because we suffer so much in America. Geez, 68 to 66 degrees would be, oh God, Bob, don't ask me to sacrifice. FDR didn't go to America and say, we have nothing to fear but fear itself and colder thermostats. He didn't say we're fighting an existential battle against fascism, the greatest threat in the history of humanity. And so, but let's do it without any inconvenience, okay? Because we're going to win this war, but nobody has to be inconvenienced, because that would be wrong. We pulled together, we said we can do it, we did it.
Okay, we have time for one last question.
So are hurricanes and tornadoes increased? Is that climate change that's causing that?
As I understand it, tornadoes, no clear connection yet. Hurricanes, the question is whether the intensity might be affected, but the incidence appears not to be related to climate change, right? In other words, there have always been hurricanes, but the intensity of them may be affected. And that only makes sense, right? I mean, this is why the science of climate change causes people to glaze over a little bit and they think it's so complicated. But it's not really that complicated, right? I mean, if you have hot water, hotter water, you can see that it's going to evaporate more. I mean, we all know this, right? And so you have more available moisture, water moisture in the air. And if you have a cyclone coming anyway, now it's got a big intensity boost with that warmer air and warm, wet air. And you get Florence with 50% more rain and Hurricane Harvey with 40% more rain. That's what the attribution science, best we know, as I understand it, is that's the way it is. 50% in Florence, 40% in Harvey. But Harvey and Florence might have existed absent climate change, but it's just that available water meant a lot more water coming down from the thunderstorms and other things created in the midst of that hurricane.
I had a fellow in conservative Lewis County. Y'all know where Lewis County is on the west side with the Uncle Sam sign.
Idaho of Washington.
What's that?
It's the Idaho of Washington.
Well, that was my district. Brother. I had the Evergreen State College in Lewis County. In the same congressional district. And so, but this guy, he's an old buzzard, he's a part of my expression, but he said that. He actually said, I'm an old buzzard. He said, well, something must be going on, because I'm 85 years old and I've already lived through 3 500-year floods. I think we make a mistake when we try to point to every hurricane or every tornado and say, oh, that's proof of climate change, or every forest fire. We've had fires in the Northwest, but what's happening is, you just look at, this sounds selfish, but it's really true. Look at the duration of the ski season over the last 15, 20 years. The ski season starting later and it's ending earlier. And what's happening there is that means our snowpack is down, and that means our forests are drying earlier, and that means our forest fires are worse. And that is actually real. That's actually happening. And so not every forest fire is climate change, but that pattern is happening. And the oyster death, that's ocean acidification. That hadn't been happening before.
So unfortunately, our time is up. Let me remind you all again, tonight at 4:30 we have a panel on impeachment. I hope you've all come out to that. And now you can see why we love having these guys come. It's really entertaining and informative. Join me now in thanking Brian Baird.